At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. This ode is taken from a poem by Lawrence Binyon titled For the Fallen. This family story I'm about to tell you unites three key elements. The first is remembrance. The second, the concept of nature or nurture. And the third, which binds the other two together, is family history research. Only by understanding these three elements do we gain a greater understanding of our ancestors. And I get a greater understanding of my grandfather, John. The first element, then, you'll remember, is remembrance. World War I was a tipping point for the British government. No matter the rank or seniority of the British soldier killed on the battlefield, none were to be repatriated to Britain. This is why the cenotaph in London was built, to give the British people a place to mourn their dead. But it was an empty tomb, its very emptiness creating a void with the British people who had nobody to mourn. Their brothers and their sons were still overseas, in many cases lying dead on the battlefield. My grandfather John lost his brother Alfred in the Great War, and like so many of the British people, he had nobody to mourn. About the same time that the cenotaph was created, David Rowton, an army padre, was touring the battlefields of France. One day he came across a tiny grave, surrounded by a small garden and a short white picket fence. The grave simply stated, "An unknown soldier." This created a concept in David Rowton's mind, a concept that the British public could use for courage and comfort. And so the unknown soldier was buried in Westminster Abbey in London. My grandfather, in the absence of a body, had a body to mourn with the British people. The second concept you'll remember is this concept of nature or nurture. Nature are genetic traits that make us human beings. Nurture are learned characteristics from our upbringing or the environment in which we're brought up in. My grandfather John was really not loved by his family. He was quite a withdrawn, introverted type of person, but he was very strict with his family. Really did not enjoy life very much at all. This was nature taking its course, genetic characteristics that took its course. For nurture, we need to think about family history research, the third element. I mentioned that John had a brother, Alfred. John lost Alfred in the Great War. In fact, Alfred set foot on French soil on the 4th of August 1914, and 22 days later he lay dead in the French mud. Imagine John receiving a telegram from the British government. Imagine yourselves receiving a telegram from the British government informing you that a beloved one is missing, presumed dead. This was the telegram that my grandfather received. In 1922, through further family history research, we realised that Alfred was discovered on the battlefield and was reburied in a marked grave. John visited this grave to pay his respects to his beloved lost brother. They had been very close. Further family history research revealed that they were born in Australia. They grew up together until their father died, and they were still young infants when their father passed away. The mother decided to return with John and Alfred to Britain, and was so poor that John and Alfred were placed into a workhouse in London, where they stayed for 3 long years. This, for me, is nature, or the learned characteristics are the environment having an effect on my grandfather's personality. The effect of losing your father at a young age, travelling thousands of miles to an unknown country where you're thrust into a workhouse and you have to survive there, albeit with your brother, for 3 years. This must have had an impact on John's character, personality, and behaviour. Later in life, John, my grandfather, was to be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. So these 3 key elements: number 1, remembrance, give us history, give us an understanding of the context of our ancestors' lives, and the fact that the unknown soldier in Westminster Abbey provided my grandfather with a body to mourn, as it did many of the British people. The second element, you'll remember, is the concept of nature or nurture, those genetic characteristics that we inherit from our ancestors carry through the generations, and certainly there were characteristics in earlier generations that defined John. But there was also nature as well, his upbringing in Australia, his movement with the family back to Britain, and his time in the workhouse that also had an impact on his personality and behaviour. I think, like many scientists now do, that a combination of nature or nurture was important here for John. And finally, the third element, family history research, which combines all those elements and pulls them together, creating a picture, a story for our ancestors. And it's only by combining these 3 elements of history, nature and nurture, and family history research that we get a full understanding of our ancestors. I get a full understanding of my ancestor, my grandfather John, and I get a better understanding of myself as well. I get the full picture. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, I will remember him.